Welcome to Brain Strength. This is a series for this average fool. Tries to teach you a thing or two about sports psychology so that you can be the best version of you. I'm your host, RJ Lynch, and with my master's in exercise and sports psychology, let's get this thing rolling. In this week's episode, we'll be continuing our series on sports and the different pieces and psychology that goes into each one individually, so that if you're one of these athletes or someone that coaches them, you can have a head start on some of your opponents and other things that might arise. In this week's episode particularly, we're going to be focusing on the psychology of wrestling. So without further ado, let's get things started with some of the personality traits we'll find. So wrestling, just like other sports, is going to have a vast array of different personalities, and there really is no one-size-fits-all kind of mold. However, there are a couple things that I see from the people that I know that become very good wrestlers that kind of transcend everything else. The first one comes down to disciplined or very self-disciplined. Whether it's their strict workout routines, their plans, sticking to things that way, or whether it's their diet. They're very strict on it, they're very disciplined. They don't just sit there and be like, that cake looks good today. Yeah, I need to cut weight right now, but cake. They're very good at pushing that off and saying, like, we can wait till after the competition. Next up, they're resilient. It's a sport where you're going to get beat down a lot. You're going to have a lot of tough losses. You're going to have moments where you're hurt, injured, beat up, sore, not wanting to continue, but they find ways to keep going forward. And then paired with that, they're very determined. A lot of the wrestlers I know are so in love with the sport. They want to be so great at it. They live and breathe wrestling. They live and die by the sword, by it, and they're just have this never give up attitude of, I'm going to win or find a way to be better, because it's more about grinding and pushing through. Next up, they tend to be very composed when they're good at the sport. Very similar to the old boxing quote of everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Wrestlers are being constantly tossed around, constantly pushed around. There is no true tape side where they can analyze every point, know exactly what they're going to do, because everybody's a little bit different. They have different tendencies. They're going to have to go from one thing to the next very quickly there. And if they get very upset because they get down early, then their opponents are able to twist their emotions and use that against them. So a good wrestler is very composed. They're able to handle a setback. They don't let their anger control them. They don't let themselves become very emotional, because they know an emotional wrestler is one that's easy to defeat. And then finally, they're coachable. The best wrestlers are the ones that understand that there's a lot of technique. There's a lot of things to learn. There's a lot of practice that goes into being great. And they're willing to go through it, willing to listen to their coaches, willing to take feedback and not have too much of an ego about themselves that's like, I don't need to listen to this guy. They listen, they learn, they get better. Now, some of the common issues I see with wrestling go along the lines of performance anxiety, stressing over their weight and their weight class, becoming burned out or overtraining, dealing with lots of self-doubt, or concerns over injury and their recovery concerns. When it comes to performance anxiety, their sport is always a 1v1. It's always mano-a-mano, person against person. Whoever wins, that's all that matters. And it puts a lot of spotlight on that moment. It means you have to do things just better than this person. You have to get over them. And it gets added on by the fact that wrestling is often a team sport, and the fact that you have to beat this one person. It's all on you in this moment. Otherwise, we as a team don't get the points necessary. And this puts a lot of stress, a lot of worry on them that they have to perform. They have to be better than this person. Because if they're not, they lose for their team. And because of this, they can develop a lot of anxiety of, oh, if I don't win this one, then our team's going to be disappointed in me. I'm going to be bad. I'm not going to stay in varsity. I'm going to be this. They'll put other people over me. So they start getting twitchy. They start overthinking their moves. They tend to get slow to act. They have physical issues such as sweaty palms, throwing up before competitions, things like this, where their body's just like, I can't make a mistake. I can't screw this up. And because they're so focused on not screwing up, they screw up. So as the mental performance consultant, what we do is we come in and we start to design pre-performance routines. We do this because one of the biggest cures for anxiety, not necessarily cure, I should say, but one of the biggest things to target anxiety is to get us out of thinking about the uncontrollables. In wrestling, you can't control what your opponent's going to do. You can only control what you do, how you prepare for it, all these things. So with a pre-performance routine, we start making that moment before the meet, before the competition, a controllable factor, something that we're like, we're going to do this, this, this. We're going to set ourselves up for success. We're going to have plenty of food. We're going to have plenty of warmth, whatever it is, so we can go in and do our best. So that when we're faced by the uncontrollables, we can just react to them instead of trying to worry about them. As part of this pre-performance routine, sometimes we do things such as mindfulness, so breathing exercises, body scans, these things where it's take a breath, let go of your worries. Anxiety is about focusing too much on what happened before in the past that you can no longer change, or trying to control things in the future that are not controllable. With mindfulness, we use our breath, we use other sensations to put us in this moment, because this moment's the only thing we can control. And then next, we do some thought reframing. When it comes to anxiety, we start having all these negative thoughts. We have things that come across our brain like, oh, we gotta do this, we gotta do this, my brain's full of things. And thought reframing is just, why are we worried about this? Shouldn't we be focused on this? Shouldn't we be worried about this controllable factor? So that you're able to free yourself up to just perform. Next up, and something that can actually add to our performance anxiety at times, is stress over our weight. So because wrestling is a weight class sport, a sport where if you don't make your weight class, you don't get to compete. This can put stress on the athlete to try to be there all the time, especially if it's one where I'm the only person in my weight class, so if I don't make my weight, we don't have anybody to face this opponent, so we automatically forfeit that weight class. That can put a lot of stress on you. It can add to your performance anxiety, other anxiety and stress that you have going on. In addition, it can look like things like disordered eating. You're so worried about your weight class that you start becoming anorexic, you start becoming bulimic, whatever it is, where you just start to develop these poor habits that lead you down a dark hole. You become so excessive on your focus on your weight that it becomes something that's consuming you all the time. Instead of focusing on your technique, instead of focusing on practice, you're focused on, well, I've got to burn this amount of calories, otherwise none of this training matters anyway, so I have focus here. And then it just creates excessive anxiety symptoms elsewhere. So you start getting very sweaty, you start throwing up, you start having headaches, you start overthinking things. All these things start to accumulate that you just become a mess of yourself. And this is one of those things that it has led to wrestlers dying in the past because they're so worried about this. And their coaches were not doing safe things to get them to lose weight. They have negative outcomes. So as the mental performance consultant, what we often do is we start with education and support. So sometimes they just need someone to talk with. They need someone that's not worried about their weight to talk to things about. So we're there to talk to them about other things, to talk about what they might need. If it's an NPC that understands training, that understands nutrition, maybe you talk a little bit about how to healthily do that, how to balance it, how to have conversations with a coach that says, oh man, I'm not comfortable losing weight anymore, but coach keeps pushing me that he needs to be in this weight class, but it's harming me. So how do we have that conversation? That's something we might teach them. That's something we might help them through. We also might point them in directions of other support. So if they're in a true eating disorder, something that they need a full licensed psychologist for, we might refer out to that, point them in the right direction, help them find the right source to help them. The other thing we might do is just some relaxation training. If they're someone that's very stressed over the fact that they have to be at a certain weight class and they think they're a failure if they're not, we might just use some relaxation training to have them take a step back, breathe, and say, like, you're more than your weight class. Breathe, let go of this stress, just kind of enjoy this moment, have some fun with this. We start to add in things to take them out of that mindset of just worrying about their weight all the time. Next up is burnout and overtraining concerns. Wrestling is usually a sport of long hours, intense practices, a lot of pressure to succeed. Once again, you're one-on-one for everything. They tend to be one of the hardest working sports where they're always running, they're always doing something, there's always a lot of intensity to everything. And so much intensity can lead to lack of motivation. It can lead to emotional and mental detachment, physical fatigue, those moments where they're just saying, like, I'm done. And that moment of when you hit, I'm done, there's really not a whole lot of coming back. So what we do as NPCs is we start to work on time management skills. We start saying, like, okay, why are you burning out? Is it just because how much time you're putting into this sport? Or is it because you're doing this sport? You have school, you have job, you have another job, you have family things going on, you have all this stuff going on right now, and you have no time in there to do it all. And you have no time to recover, no time to relax. So we focus on building in these blocks to find that relaxation time, to take them away from the sport. Because if you're in the sport or in stress all the time, that's where you get burned out. Next up, we start to do things to focus on recovery. We set goals of how much time you're going to recover, how much time you're going to step away. You're going to rework goals that say, instead of just focus on this, can we focus on improvement so that you're releasing some of that stress? Are we recovering properly so that you're relieving that stress? Burnout and overtraining is kind of like having a pot on the stove. You've got the lid on and you're starting to warm up the water. Now, if you let that go too long, the lid pops up, you're overboiled, you got things going everywhere, it becomes a pressure cooker and just explodes. If you warm it up a little bit and then are able to release some of that pressure here and here, that becomes a lot easier to keep going. You can keep it lasting. Next up can be self-doubt. So wrestlers that I know, some of them can be very confident because they have to go into the mentality that I can beat this person. I am going to dominate this person. But in those moments where all of a sudden they get beat, where things get wrong, where all of a sudden that upset happens and they get pinned all of a sudden, they can start to spiral into, am I not as good as I think I am? Oh God, if I can't beat that loser, how am I going to beat people that are much better? And they start getting these spiral thoughts. And with that, they start to have issues with practice. They aren't as motivated. They aren't pushing themselves the same. They're kind of struggling to get back into a flow of trying because they're doubting everything they do. They start focusing on little things that they're pretty good at instead of the other things you're trying to get them to work on. They're constantly starting to compare themselves to others. They're focusing on what other people are doing, how good they are at something instead of just improving what they are doing. Or they avoid opportunities to grow. So if they're dealing with self-doubt, with confidence issues, they're going to try to stick to the things they're good at instead of stretching themselves. But in stretching ourselves, that's where we learn, where we push ourselves. When we fail, that's when we get to the point of growth. But they're going to avoid these opportunities for growth because they're so worried about damaging their ego any further. So as a mental performance consultant, I work on process goals. I work on our self-talk strategies because sometimes confidence is what they're saying to themselves, so we have to fix that. Sometimes it's imagery practice. I have to have them visually see themselves do things better before they're going to believe themselves that they can do it better. And then lastly is injury and recovery concerns. Whether it's small or large injuries, they're part of the sport. Re-injury is a constant for wrestlers because you're getting literally tossed around, moved like a rag doll, beat up. There's always something that's going to hurt. And there's always going to be this constant fear of, is this going to be the pain? Is this going to be the thing that ends my career? Or they're going to be having an injury and they're worried about, is this it? Am I going to be able to come back the same? Am I still somebody that's worthy while I'm hurt? So they start having identity issues. They start having issues of, what am I if I'm not a wrestler? They have issues staying motivated when they are hurt. They have that moment of like, God, if I come back from this, am I going to be the same? Does it matter? Should I keep trying because I'm never going to be who I was? Or do I even want to come back? Because if I do come back, maybe the next thing is going to paralyze me. They start having those motivation issues. They start growing distant from their team. They avoid situations where they could get hurt again, or there is a certain drill, a certain thing that they get hurt in, so they avoid that even though they have to do it. Otherwise, they're not going to perform at their best. As an NPC, we do things such as ID exploration. So we try to make sure we detach them from just being a wrestler. So when they are injured or when they're away from wrestling, they're not thinking about, what am I? I'm nothing. Because that's a spiral people get into. We do things like return to play imagery. So when they are injured, to help them get over that fear of re-injury or that fear of doing something that got them hurt, we start having them mentally sit and practice those reps over and over again. And then we do short-term goals. When you're injured, sometimes motivation gets lost just because recovery stuff sucks. So what do? We set little mini goals in there of, oh, can you do this? Can you better yourself here, here, here? Until you eventually get to the point where, oh, now I'm back. I've built all the little stones to get to my big goal of returning. But once you get cut through these concerns, among many others that can pop up, you find the successful athlete. You find an athlete that's tough, that's going to push through and keep doing things. They're mentally and physically just tougher than the rest. They're disciplined. They're going to work harder. They're going to stay in it. They're not going to stray from their diets. They're not going to stray from their training. They're going to do what coaches tell them, and they're going to work hard. They're going to have that strong work ethic. There's someone that's going to say, I don't care how long I'm in the gym. I don't care how many reps I have to do. I am going to do all the work, and I'm going to be the best. They're going to be coachable. They're going to listen. They're going to pay attention. They're going to learn techniques and get there. And then they're going to be competitive. They know it's 1v1, me versus you. I'm going to beat you, and I'm going to be my best as I do it. And with that said, that's all I have for this week's episode of Brain Strength. So until next time, if there's anything in this video that you found offensive, I hope you can forgive me. If you say anything in the comments that I find offensive, I'll forgive you. Brain Strength, out.